Welcome to the Rusted Garden Homestead. Today I'm going to show you how to refresh your containers. Some of these have perennial herbs in there, some of them had annuals. I'm going to show you how you refresh each container. We're going to use granular fertilizer, a slow release. We're going to use a water-soluble fertilizer, and we're just going to set up all these containers. I'll move through them pretty quickly. We're also going to trim back some of the herbs and the different plants that are in here. But when you have containers, you don't really have to dump out the soil, throw it away. You can refresh it maybe every 3 years. But when you have perennial plants in there, plants that will, stay alive through the winter, you can't really dump the soil out. And maybe you have a really large container like this one. What do you do with it? I'm going to show you how to take care of all of these very quickly. Apply it to your garden as you wish. This is part of my kitchen herb garden. I have oregano, chives, lavender. Clear out the weeds, of course. Go compost them. Up there I have sage, I think thyme, also some more oregano. These will get planted up with annual herbs also, but first step, clear out the weeds. Second step, since I'm not going to be able to ever dump this out because I have perennial plants in here, just take any organic granular fertilizer, heavy handful, and sprinkle it around. It's not going to hurt your plants. And I do that every year. Any organic granular that has N, P, and K represented is perfectly fine. Next step is to kind of fill it with maybe an inch or two of compost. This is bagged leaf grow. You can use any compost as long as it's well broken down. And we would just go through and drop in ½ inch to an inch and cover the whole surface. Let me do that. Dropped in about ½ inch to an inch of compost throughout the whole container. I pulled back and just yanked out oregano that was growing into the lavender. This lavender looks pretty good. It has new leaves growing down here. One thing that you can do though, if it looked even more scraggly than this, I would just cut the top off and I would go around and trim them all back, and that will force new growth to come up in there. But I'm going to leave this as it is. So we put down the organic granular, we put down the compost. You can again take another handful, just sprinkle it in. And I'm going to water this in with AgroThrive. I'm affiliated with them. I recommend AgroThrive for your water-soluble fertilizer. It's organic. It's a 332 NP and K. And that's all we're really doing, is we're giving the containers nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. You can use any water-soluble fertilizer that you want. Let me grab this out of the way. And then we're just going to take it and soak in probably a good gallon's worth of the water-soluble. That pot right there was mint. It looks like it didn't survive. When you're putting down the compost, you can get this on the plant leaves. The oregano that's surviving right in there, it just has to pop up a little bit. It'll totally grow through the compost. So about a gallon in there. Let that sink in, and then when we're done, we're going to come back and water everything in thoroughly. But this will get this container set up nicely. After shooting the video, I wanted to clarify a couple of things. When I talk about dumping your soil out, every 3 years or so, I dump out my container mix, I refresh it, I add amendments, I put it back into the container. You don't have to do that every year. So I'm showing you a way, one, to deal with containers that have rooted perennials in there, and how to just freshen it up in spring without dumping it out and doing all that. I will link a video in the description that shows you how to refresh your containers if you want to dump it out and add stuff to it. The other thing that I wanted to clarify, and all these have been taken care of, you'll see that through the video. The other thing I wanted to clarify is that the organic granular fertilizer is a slow release. It breaks down over time with soil biology, and it feeds your plants over the months. Water-soluble fertilizer feeds the plants immediately, and compost feeds your plants right away and over time. If I only had to pick one fertilizer, if you're on a budget for containers, I would go with the water-soluble fertilizer. You're going to need to use that regularly over the year. If I was going to pick two things, I would do compost and I would do water-soluble fertilizer. And it's really up to you how you want to use the different options I show you. It's up to you how you want to use them in your garden. This is my other herb container. We'd set this up the same way. That's mint in there, so you want to definitely cut back any of the old growth. And then in here I have sage, and I want to cut this all back. Well, this one's actually dead. Now, I probably should be using pruners. I use scissors for rosemary and lavender, but you want to cut this back nicely. You just don't need all that growth, and it's going to force the leaves to come in from the root system of the sage, and it's much it tastes better that way. It's not going to be all scraggly looking like this. I am going to leave this branch coming down here. I think that looks cool, but you want to cut back your sage, your lavenders, your woodier herbs, and they will all grow right out of the base, which just gives you better leaves to use when you're cooking. This is broadleaf sage. I would do the same thing. It's already coming back, but just cut the tops off, cut it back nicely, and that's all going to fill in beautifully with growth. This is a currant plant. I've just added in some of the organic granular. You can't really overdo it because it slowly breaks down over time. Again, any organic granular with NP and K represented, this will slowly break down with the soil biology in there. As you water, as it rains, it'll wash into the root system. If any of this was dead, you would go ahead and cut it back. Once you put down the organic granular, again, throw in the compost. That looks pretty good, and then water it in with your water-soluble fertilizer, and this gets the plants off to a great start in the spring, just something like that. And we would come back and water this in thoroughly. Now, in some cases your soil may be too high to the top. You could remove some of that. Usually you don't damage the root systems. The perennial plants, the roots go down pretty deep. Remove some of that soil and just replace it with compost. In the containers right here, this is where I was growing annuals. You could, dump this out, but you don't really have to, unless it's a couple of years old. Handful of fertilizer, a bigger handful into here, and then I would just kind of break it up. There's a root ball in there. When I go to plant my new annuals, I'll take a shovel and just break that all up. The new annual plants will go into there. And I'm also going to take at this time a couple handfuls of compost. That's pretty good. And that's going to give this container enough nutrition to get started. When I dig the hole right here, maybe I throw in a little bit more compost, but that's plenty for your containers. Containers are really going to be managed over the season. You set them up, you feed them, you get them started, but you have to continually water and feed these plants differently than your garden because it's a smaller space, so the root systems really take water out and nutrients out pretty quickly. So if you want to subscribe and follow, I'll show you how I take care of my container garden. All right, let's go over to the other containers. This is bee balm. It's also a perennial, and there's also, I think, some dianthus in there. So the plant is really using a lot of the space. A little bit organic granular, and I'm just going to work it in, scatter it down. Nothing fancy. You could try and squeeze in some compost if you want to, but for a container like this, it's most important to just give it a big drink of the water-soluble fertilizer. This has NP and K in there, plenty for this. Giving it a little bit more and kind of just imagining putting in enough that it's dripping all the way down into the root system. So you can set your plants up like this. There's not that much room for compost, so you can go ahead and skip that. But water-soluble fertilizer gives the plants everything that they need. Now this is my rosemary plant. It's pretty beat up. There is new growth. Lots of dead tips. The rosemary for this year throughout my garden, a lot of it just died off. I'm not going to spend the time now to put in organic granular fertilizer and compost. I want to see if this plant survives. Water-soluble fertilizer, the difference between the organic granular is this is slow release. So it slowly breaks down and turns into a form that your plants can use. The water-soluble, the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are immediately available to the plant. So I'm going to give the rosemary a big drink of water-soluble fertilizer. I want it to have all this nitrogen, and I want to see how well, Willow, stay back. The organic fertilizer smells good to the dogs. Get back. And they try and actually drink it. Stay back. So the water-soluble fertilizer will give this rosemary plant or any plant a lot of nitrogen, and I want to see how much growth comes back. I want to see if leaves start coming in here, and if everything looks pretty good, I'll prune this back, replace or refresh the soil, and this container will be good to go. Let's finish up with these 4 containers, and again, I'm just teaching you principles. You can use these to however they best fit your container garden. Fig tree. So I'm going to remove some of the mulch and soil, and we will do the organic granular, the compost, water it in with fertilizer. Another container with sage, oregano, and chives. Going to clean this up, cut the oregano back, and then I'm going to scatter down the same thing, organic granular, compost, water it in. This is mint. Mint should really be in a container because it's very, very invasive and it will take over space. This is just going to get watered in. I'll cut it back, watered in with a water-soluble fertilizer. I grow peppers in here, so this is going to get completely cleaned up. Going to set it up now with just the organic granular and the compost. I'm not going to water it in because there's nothing growing in there, but when I put in my plants, that's when I will use the water-soluble fertilizer. You only really need the water-soluble if you have something growing at the moment, and then when you add in new plants, you can give them the water-soluble again. Okay, let me clean up this area. I cleaned up the space around the plants, removed the mulch from around the fig plant, keeping some columbines, and that is a carnation, and just put the mulch into containers. You can reuse that later. And I just wanted to show you, actually, again, the scattering doesn't have to be scientific. That's the organic granular. Cleaned out the container here, also removed some of the mulch, organic granular, scattered in. And then as you work your way down, we're coming to the mint, which there's a lot in there. Organic granular, you don't want it sitting on the leaves, so you can just go ahead and rub it in. That will get to the bottom. Even if you accidentally kill off some of your mint, mint is just crazy strong. It's going to come back. We would water this in with the water soluble. This is where the peppers are. The only thing I'm keeping in there was I found a strawberry plant, so that is going to get actually some water soluble fertilizer, and we would take care of this because peppers are annuals here in Maryland. We really want to feed them. Your vegetables and your fruiting crops need a lot of fertilizer, so we're going to put in a lot of the organic granular, and I know this is well prepared because I prepared it, and I'm just going to work it in. You're going to find grubs too. Don't worry about those. They show up in every garden. Toss them out if you see them, but typically they don't eat the plant roots. These are probably Japanese beetles or something like that, but I get them all the time. They leave my plants alone. You have to know sort of what grubs you have in here, what insects you have in here, in case it's something you do have to treat, but when you see them, don't panic. So that sets it up with the organic granular. Let me drop down the compost and we'll finish up. This is for, you know, your spring cleanup, getting your plants started for the season. If you're on a budget, you don't need to use compost or the organic granular. Water-soluble fertilizer is your best friend, and that's what I would recommend for your container gardens. Compost is wonderful for garden plants. It's more important out in your garden, in the earth. Containers are a little bit of a different beast because the plants take out so much moisture and fertilizer quickly that you constantly have to be giving it back, and the best way to do that is with the water soluble. So this is going to get a drink of the water soluble, and remember, I'm not going to do it in the video, but I'm going to come back and then water this in well. Just give it some of what it needs. I'm just going to water in the base here of the fig tree. Coming over to the peppermint, well, we don't want that in there, but that's the organic granular. Just really soak it in. One hand on the camera, one hand on here so I can't move that. And then remember, this is where the peppers are good to go. It's set up. The organic granular is mixed in. Going to water that strawberry plant. That's all you really need to do. Now this again gets them set up for the spring, gets them growing. You're going to have to maintain and feed your container plants usually at least once a month in the beginning, more often when they're bigger depending on what you're growing. Please subscribe. I'll show you how to take care of your container plants over the season. And just remember, again, I want to stress that you have to continually feed these plants because they're going to take the nutrients out really, really quickly when they get larger. Please visit my seed shop at therustedgarden.com, and thanks for watching.